Okay, so this is story number 1 for Seeds of the Sower. Today is November 14th, 2021. So the first story I want to tell is the story of Joseph. And Joseph had a special talent, and it was apparent to everyone that met him. And his dad knew he was the favorite. His brothers knew. They were jealous, and because they were jealous, they made a plot to sell him into slavery. He got sent to Egypt, and he was bought by Potiphar, a wealthy man, high-ranking government official in Egypt. And right away, this is at the age of 17, okay? Right away, Potiphar noticed that Joseph was special. And the Bible doesn't say how, what it was, what specifically it was that tipped Potiphar off. And we could speculate, but he figured out that Joseph had a talent, that he was special, that God was with him. And before long, he put him in charge of everything in his house. And his house was running great. His business interests, I don't know if he was farming or whatever he did, but because Joseph had a talent, and that talent was administration. He was a great administrator, a great capital allocator. And he ran Potiphar's house amazingly. Potiphar's wife also noticed and set eyes on him. That didn't go too well. He ended up in jail. Okay, but guess what happened in jail? The warden right away noticed that Joseph was special. I don't know how. Maybe he put him in charge of something and it started running well, the kitchen or mail or whatever. And before long, Joseph was running the whole prison. And it was running well. And everyone was happy, right? Even the prisoners were probably eating better, and the warden, his job became easy because Joseph was just an amazing administrator. Okay? And in prison, he met these two guys. One was the cup holder, and I think the other one was a baker that worked for the Pharaoh of Egypt. And they both had a dream, and they could not interpret the dream. They didn't know what the dream meant. So Joseph said, well, tell me your dream. I could interpret it. And sure enough, he did. He said, hey, what your dream means is in 3 days, you're going to die. And to the other guy, he said, in 3 days, you're going to be back at work. And sure enough, 3 days later, one guy was dead. The other guy was back at work. And he told the guy that was going to be back at work, because he worked for Pharaoh. He said, hey, when you get back to work, I want you to tell Pharaoh about me. Remember me. And so the guy went back to work, and he was so happy to be out of prison. He forgot to tell Pharaoh. 2 years went by, and Pharaoh had a dream. And this dream disturbed him greatly. He called all his wise men to help him interpret this dream, and none of them could. The wisest men in Egypt, which was, a pretty powerful kingdom, and their wisest men couldn't figure this thing out. And so, Joseph, the cupbearer said, I know who can interpret this dream. And he told Pharaoh, I gotta apologize. I met this guy when I was in prison. He's an interpreter of dreams, and I bet you he could do it. And he told me when I got out to tell you about him, but I forgot. And so he said, well, call this kid. By now, Joseph was 30 years old. He calls They call for him. They get him out of prison. They clean him up, shave him, put some clean clothes on him, and put him before the Pharaoh, who's right now holding court because he's trying to get his wise men to figure out what this dream means, and they couldn't. So here, young man Joseph shows up, and he says, yeah, it's not me, it's God that will give the answer. But go ahead, tell me your dream. And he interprets the dream. And the dream, it was two dreams. One was of 7 fat cows. And then 7 skinny cows came up and ate the beautiful, fat, healthy, strong cows. And even after eating them, those skinny, mangy, dying cows, they still looked like they were dying. Okay, the second dream was these haystacks. Same thing, these 7 beautiful, healthy, fat, full, vibrant haystacks. And then these 7 other skinny, withered haystacks came up, ate them, and they were still skinny. And he goes, what does this dream mean? And Joseph said, well, here's what it means. It means there's going to be 7 years of prosperity, of wealth and plenteousness, and it's going to be followed by 7 years of famine. And the famine's going to be so bad that people are going to forget the prosperity, and it's going to, everything that was gathered during the time of prosperity will be gone, right? And he said, if you were smart, you'd put someone in charge to take a fifth of all the provision from the 7 plenteous years to get you through the 7 rough years. And here's this funny scene. Pharaoh says out loud in the presence of all his wise men and his dignitaries and his leaders and his magicians and academics and his counselors and his board of directors, you know, his cabinet, if you will. Is there anybody in all the land as wise as this guy that could lead the country through this upcoming difficult time? And them being politicians, you would have thought one of them would say, well, I'll take the promotion, put my name in the hat, right? Not a one. What was it about this kid Joseph that people just saw in him that said, let him run things, right? Potiphar, the warden, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and all the dignitaries, they said, put that guy in charge. I know we just pulled him out of prison. Put him in charge of the entire country. Somehow they did. Somehow everyone thought that was a great idea. And they did. And it was a great idea because he did exactly what he said he would do. In the 7 years of plenteous, he stored up the wheat. And and they built great silos in the cities and they stored it up. So basically he took a 20% tax. Everybody had to pay 20% tax, and he didn't spend it on projects or anything. He just saved it. He just saved it up. And so the only difference you could notice, and things were good. So, 20% tax wasn't that onerous on the people. And the only thing you notice is, hey, these new silos are being built up everywhere. And you're like, well, I wonder what's in those silos. Wheat. And like, what are they doing with it? Nothing, just storing it. Huh, that's interesting. And people are going on with their lives. Okay. So, sure enough, 7 years were of plenteousness. And then the famine started in the 8th year. And the people came to Pharaoh and they said, hey, we had a rough year. We had a rough harvest and we don't have anything to eat. What should we do? what are you going to do for his Pharaoh? And Pharaoh, who was really happy, I mean, Joseph was running the country. He was like the warden, where Joseph was running the prison, and he was like Potiphar, when Joseph was running his house. He didn't really have a care in the world. And he said, well, go ask Joseph. He'll know. And so they did. They went to Joseph, and they said, we don't have any food. And he opened up the storehouses, and he did this. He started selling them wheat. Now I want you to think about that. He could have opened up a wheat business, right? Pharaoh's bakery, at any time in those 7 years of prosperity. But why did he wait till the 8th year to open up Pharaoh's bakery? Because why would he do it in the 7 good years? There's a bakery in every corner, and there's wheat aplenty, right? What kind of price could he get for his bread at that time? I bet it was pretty cheap because everyone was selling it, right? Now the famine starts. There's no bread to be bought, and that's when he opens his bakery. When he opens Pharaoh's bakery, and there's a line out the door, and he's cleaning up. So everybody goes to Pharaoh's bakery to buy bread. Year 2, the famine continues. Okay, year 2, the famine continues, and people go back to Pharaoh. They go back to Joseph, actually, and they say, hey, sell us bread because we don't have anything to eat. And they go, sure, I'll sell you bread. And they said, well, actually, we gave you all our money last year. All the money we have. We didn't have much saved up from the 7 good years. We could have taken your lead and saved up money like you were, but we didn't. And so we spent it all, and we had 1 year's savings when we really needed 7. And so we're out of money. But we're starving. He said, oh, well, what do you got? They said, we have our stock, which back then was called livestock. But it's the same thing, right? He said, okay, I'll buy your stock off of you. Your livestock, your cattle and your sheep and your goats and your pigs. Right, your pork bellies. And then I'll sell you wheat, and I'll sell you bread. So in year 2, he opened up Pharaoh's butcher shop, right? And he was selling bread, and he was selling meat. Now let me ask you this. And of course he had the royal stables and all that. At what price do you think he was selling that bread? At a pretty favorable price for him. At what price do you think he was buying the livestock? Right? Stocks were down, right? The country was in a famine. He bought those stocks cheap, and he sold the bread at a pretty good, favorable terms for himself, right? What a great capital allocator. What a brilliant man. And obviously, Pharaoh's balance sheet is looking better and better, right? Over those 7 years, his balance sheet was growing and growing with wheat, right? And then in year 1 of the famine, year 8 of this 14-year plan, he started acquiring a bunch of cash, right? Because he started selling off some of that wheat. And pretty much by the end of that 8th year of the plan, or the first year of the famine, he had all the cash. He had hoarded up all the cash from the land. In the 9th year, he bought up all the stock. Because the value of that wheat had appreciated due to scarcity, and the value of the stocks had gone down, he sold wheat at the right time, and he bought stock at the right time. And Pharaoh's balance sheet was looking better and better. At the end of the 9th year, he pretty much ran the wheat market and the stock market, and all the cash was in his treasury. Okay, year 10, the famine continues. The people come to Joseph, sell us bread because we perish. And he said, sure, I'll sell you bread. What do you got? They said, well, you took all our cash 2 years ago. You took all our stock last year. All we have is our labor and our houses. He goes, all right, I'll buy your houses off you. Or I'll mortgage them. Either way. I'll secure you some credit on your houses. But I think he bought it. Because if you read the rest of the story, the land ended up being in Pharaoh's hands. So he bought up all the real estate in exchange for bread. Now, how was the real estate market doing at that time? In the 3rd year of a famine? Not that good, right? So I bet you he bought that real estate at pretty favorable terms, right? And the value of the wheat was at an all-time high because he was the only bakery in town, right? So he was exchanging highly priced wheat for cheap real estate. And how did that do to Pharaoh's balance sheet? Now what does Pharaoh own? The wheat, the cash, the stock, and the land, right? They come back the next year and they're like, we don't have anything to our name. All we have is our ability to provide labor. He goes, well, I'll buy that. I'll use that as security against this wheat purchase. Right? So now what does Pharaoh own? He owns everything. He owns the wheat, the cash, the stock, the land, and he's got these people consigned to work for him. Probably a 7-year consignment or something like that. So, Joseph does a sale leaseback. He buys their land and he rents it back out to him. And he says, whatever you harvest, I get 20% forever. And they were happy because Joseph was feeding them. So they were basically his laborers. Joseph was feeding them. They didn't starve. Now, other countries had it worse because they didn't have a Joseph that had 10, 11 years earlier made this plan to survive. So not only did Egypt survive and thrive through this famine, their neighboring countries came and indebted themselves to Egypt as well. So Egypt went from a country to an empire, okay, because of Joseph's plan. So 14 years finally passed, and Pharaoh owns everything because of Joseph's plan, right? So what do you think they did with all that stuff? They're like, hey, Joseph, hey, Pharaoh, we have all this land, we have all this cash, we have all this labor, and we have all this stock, which you consider some machinery back then, you know, equipment. An ox was their version of a tractor, you know. What shall we do? He's like, well, just build pyramids in the desert, right? They did not have to finance the construction of those pyramids, right? And when their elders died, they buried them with tons of wealth. And it wasn't a sacrifice to bear. I mean, they didn't really have to tighten their belts to load up these tombs, these pyramids, with massive amounts of wealth, gold and other highly precious artwork and all kinds of things. I went to the King Tut thing in LA, and it was amazing. And that was the stuff that That's not the stuff they adorned their house with. That's the stuff they buried their loved ones with. I mean, imagine what their houses looked like if that was the stuff they buried, right? It was just an unfathomable wealth that Joseph had amassed for Pharaoh and his family in a period of 14 years. Amazing story of a capital allocator, what he can do if he knows what he's doing. And the Bible says that that strategy that he had put in place, that 20% tax, that saved 20%, they kept doing it. And the Bible says until this day. And by the way, that's in the book of Genesis, written by Moses 400 years after that story, right? So for 400 years, the family of Pharaoh profited and benefited from Joseph's financial plan that he put in place, and they remained in power and in wealth for generations after Joseph had died, but they kept following his plan. So that's an amazing story, and there's a lot of great lessons there that we could pull out of that. I could boil it down to four main points as far as a strategy for us to follow in his steps as a capital allocator or an investment manager. Number one was live off of 80%. Right, live off of 80%. Number two, save the 20%. Number three, invest and grow your capital. And then number four, build pyramids. Right, because you'll have not only enough, but more than enough. This is a 14-year plan. And I want you to think about, what pyramids would I build if I put myself on this 14-year plan and I had more than enough for myself and my kids? What would God be asking me to do with my money for his honor and his glory? That he gave me the power to get, that he gave me the insight in his word on how to manage this money. And we could go really deep into the principles of this story. Is when he was saving, when times were good, he wasn't buying stuff up, really. When times were bad, he swooped in and bought stuff cheap, right? And think about that. There's no rush. You start building up your savings, you start paying off your debts, you have a little cash there, and it's not making much in the bank. For 7 years, how much was that wheat making sitting in those silos? Nothing. And that didn't bug Joseph. He didn't go out and get into the bakery business at its peak. He waited, right? He was very patient. 7 years. The silos were full. His money was doing nothing. Everyone else's money was probably doing pretty good because the economy was going great. And he just waited. He waited to buy till there was blood in the streets. Right? That's a quote from, I think it's the great J. Paul Getty. Warren Buffett says, be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy when others are fearful. I don't like either of those two emotions, fear or greed. So I think this is a more Christian way to say it. Don't be greedy when other people are greedy. And don't be fearful when other people are fearful. It's basically the same thing. And that's what Joseph did. He was a master administrator. He was a master capital allocator. And he made Pharaoh's family the most wealthiest family in the world for over 400 years. Right? And they built pyramids in the desert that stand to this day from the abundance of wealth that they had created in that short 14-year plan, because they followed 14-year period, because they followed Joseph's 14-year plan of living off of 80%, saving the 20%, investing and growing, and then right? You don't start building pyramids in year 2 of this plan. And in year 14, then he started to build pyramids. Okay, so hope you guys have a great day.